The fields we define for a content type determine the fields that we see when we edit and display that particular node of content. So in the case of our book, we would end up with a book name and a body field by default. Later we'll see how we can add additional fields and control their display on the edit forms and in the display of an individual node. Now, the content type settings determine, as we've said, the defaults when you go to create a node of that content type. So for example, if we said no revisions, that means by default, no revision would be created for a particular node, but the author retains the option. Similarly, we'll see with comments and publishing options, the settings for the content type determine the default, but the author could still change those defaults, assuming they had sufficient permissions to do so. Once you've created nodes of content, the Find Content screen gives you filtering functionality to choose content, and it enables you to globally configure or delete the content, or click through to individual nodes to configure them, view them, or delete them. We'll see that this screen gives us a filtering interface, allowing us to filter by type or by status, like published or not, promoted or not, etc., as well as global update options to change those statuses or delete items of content, and some other capabilities as well. You'd also find that the filtered content could be clicked through to view. You could look at the author's user record. You can filter by update date, language, click through to edit or delete individual items. Let's go in and take a look. I'm going to go and add a few items using the content type we created, the book content type. I'm going to add Walden as a book, and I'll just use some lorem ipsum text for it. But more interestingly, let's take a look at these settings. So our book content type, we said no revision. That means by default the revision functionality is turned off, but I could enable it for a particular node. You could also control the URL path explicitly. Later we'll see how the Acquia Dev desktops pre-installed with the Path Auto module, which allows it to automatically create URL aliases using patterns that will be defined. We can also open comments for this item, even though they're closed by default. We could set authoring information, though it won't be displayed. And for these books, we did say that they would be published and promoted to the front page by default. We could choose to change this for a particular node. For the moment, I'll leave it checked, and I'll save my book. Then I'll quickly create a second book. Again with some ipsum content. And this time, let's preview this. I'll click through. Preview was set as optional, and we'll see that for this particular content type, the basic description field has both a summary trimmed version as well as a full version. We'll look at those settings for that particular field type a bit more later in the module. If I scroll down, I could go in and edit any of these values, edit any of the configurations. It all looks good for now. I'll save the change. And if I click through to the front page, we see that both items have been promoted to the front page by default in what we'll learn later is called the teaser format, which displays just the summary of the text. But I want to go through and modify this. I'm going to go to the Find Content screen, and I'll see that I could filter for just items that had been promoted and or filter by type. Here I'll filter by my book type, and I'll add a second filter for only items which have been promoted to the front page. Or refine my filter with that setting. Now in this case, because both are promoted, both are still in the list, both Ulysses and Walden. However, I could, for example, click on just Ulysses and say, no, I want to demote that from the front page. I'll click to update that item, and it disappears from the list because the filter is persistent. It's persistent until I choose to reset it, at which point I'm back to seeing all of the content items, including the fact that Ulysses has been updated. So of course, if I go out to the front page, while I still see Walden, I no longer see Ulysses.